Okay, so Akanksha, over to you.
Thank you, Vishu. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Today, I'll be presenting my PhD work in which I worked on collective escape dynamics of fission fusion societies in the wild. So, group living animals they come together and form these huge groups and perform coordinated motion in various contexts, such as food search, mate search, or predator escape. And while moving together, sometimes they display these spectacular visual patterns. And when looking at such patterns, one may wonder that how so many individuals are able to move coordinatedly and how does the information get transferred in such huge groups and what might be the decision making in these groups, whether it's centralized or decentralized. And what we know about these groups is that these seemingly complex patterns can sometimes have simple mechanistic explanations. So the patterns which we see at group level may arise from local level interactions. And these interactions could be as simple as one individual getting attracted to other individual and trying to get closer to other individuals, or an individual trying to copy the direction of other individuals. And these interaction rules itself may be affected by various factors, external factors, such as the habitat in which they reside or contexts such as predation. So first let's have a look at what we know about these groups and their collective dynamics. So this study examining the link between habitat openness and group size distribution shows that in black bug groups, habitat structure determines the population variation in group size. So here we see a link between group size and habitat structure. There are also many theoretical studies which try to explain why we see these various types of patterns formed by the groups. So for example, here in this study, we see that the group size and heterogeneity among individuals determines not only the fission rates in these groups, but various patterns formed by these groups. Another factor which I mentioned earlier, which affects group level properties, is predation. So, in this study, it was observed that in a high predation pressure scenario, groups are more cohesive and polarized. What it tells us is that predation shapes local social interactions as well as attraction repulsion dynamics in these fish schools. Another experimental study on starling flocks, which were attacked by a predator, showed that different types of patterns were formed by these starling flocks. And the nature of these patterns depends on predator's behavior or predatory threat. So, what we recognize from this literature is that we understand group dynamics and its link to various factors in isolation. However, in nature, all of these factors are acting together. So, a group moving in natural environment, individuals are not only interacting with each other, but they are simultaneously responding to other cues such as habitat or predators. And so, to answer these questions for an animal group, we need to study them in their natural environment. However, such studies are rare and difficult to conduct in wild. So, with that motivation, for my PhD thesis, I studied collective escape dynamics of animal groups in their natural habitat. And the framework which I used for this study is that first I looked at the collective behavior of these animals, both at group level and local level. And then I explored the factors such as heterogeneity, which can be attributed to group composition or spatial position of individuals in these groups, how these factors affect the patterns which we see at group level. And this my study system is black bug. So black bug are these antelopes native to Indian subcontinent. They form huge groups and show fission fusion or mud split dynamics. And these groups which we see for these animals could have different composition ranging from all male, all female groups to mixed sex herds. And for the study site where we observed these animals, the observed group size was from 20 to 600 individuals. So we see a huge variation in this group size. We conducted our study at Velavadar National Park. It is largely a semi-arid grassland, and the and there is some amount of habitat variation there. Now, once we have identified our study system, as we are interested in collective movement patterns of these groups, it is clear that now we want to observe all the individuals in these groups at the same time. However, the traditional techniques such as focal sampling or scan sampling, there is a trade-off between spatial or temporal resolution. So we need an observation technique where we could observe all the individuals and their interactions simultaneously. And recent advancement in aerial imagery allows us to do so. So for our study, we recorded black bug herds behavior using UAVs at high resolution, and these videos are around 10 to 15 minutes in duration due to battery restrictions. But this duration is sufficient for our work because these mechanism in which we are interested in, these events last for a very short time span. So we took multiple videos of these herds in Velavadar National Park. Here I am showing you one such example video where you can see we are recording a black bug herd in their natural state. Now what we need from these videos to study collective movement? We need spatial information. So we need these individuals. So we need these individuals' spatial position with respect to each other, and we need to see how this position changes throughout the video. So we need both spatial and temporal information of the individuals. And we recorded over 100 such videos at 30 fps, which gives us around 2.6 billion images. And because there are multiple individuals in every video, so we have to track around 100 million animals. And this task becomes really difficult or impossible to do manually. So we need to automate this task before proceeding further. And this challenge of automating the task of identifying individuals and tracking them is known as object recognition and object tracking respectively in computer vision literature. So this added one more task to my thesis, which was to come up with a method to track animals from the videos which are recorded in their natural environment. My thesis is currently organized in two parts. In first part, we developed and tested methods for animal tracking, and in the second part, I studied their collective behavior. So moving on to first chapter. In this chapter, we developed a machine learning method and framework to track the animals in videos which are recorded in their natural habitat. And to make this method accessible to a wider audience, we also developed a GUI tool for this framework. And we tested our method on 2 species in various contexts. So first, let's talk about the methods. As I mentioned, this problem known as object detection problem. For this, one can use various methods, and there are some simpler approaches in the field of image processing. And we first tried these approaches for our data. So first approach which we used is image subtraction. It is commonly used for motion detection in videos or to identify differences between two images. So basic principle how this approach works is that if you take two images and subtract one image from the other, you will get the pixel values where there are differences. So if an object is in motion, you will get the regions where there is a difference between two images, and that is how you track that object here. Now, depending on the nature of this algorithm itself, you might be able to see that there are some limitations. We need a homogeneous and static background for this method to work properly. And our object of interest or animal should be moving continuously. There is another method which depends on the color or other contrast properties of the object known as color thresholding. In this method, we put a threshold or cutoff value for the color of our interest. So in this example, you can see that we have put a threshold for green color. So in the end, we get only green colored object as the output. So again, the way this method works poses some limitations. If there is low variation in animal appearance, then this method can work well. But if animal itself varies in appearance a lot, then this method wouldn't work. And again, we need homogeneous background and high contrast between animal and background. So we implemented these two methods in our videos, and I'll show you the results. So here there is one output result using background subtraction. So as you can see here, this red circle tells the animals which were missed by the algorithm, and red rectangles show the noise, which means other things identified as animals. So clearly this method didn't work for our videos. Then we implemented color threshold approach. And here again you can see that similar looking objects are being identified as black bug, and some black bug are getting missed if their appearance is too similar to their background. So now we needed a sophisticated approach. These simpler approaches didn't work for our data. So machine learning methods have been proven to work well for such complicated tasks in computer science field. However, these methods haven't been developed or implemented in the context of animal tracking. And even if few implementations are there, they are not generalizable. So we use this technique called neural networks, which is a set of supervised learning technique. So what you need to know for the purpose of this talk is that a neural network, there are many nodes arranged in layers which do the work of mapping. So we provide an input, which our case will be an image, and it gives output as the classification, so as animal or background. First task to use this approach for the task of object detection is to create this network. As you can see in these two examples, there are different structure of the networks. And there are many types of network architectures out there. So for our purpose, we developed various network architectures. We parameterized those and tested those on our test data. And we repeated this cycle until we could find an optimum network for our purpose. And once this task was done, once we have created this network, there are various other tasks associated with object detection. So first, as I mentioned earlier, it takes an input data. So this input data is called training data, where we provide labeled examples to this network. And we have to provide many examples. Each category would require around 10,000 samples at least. So this task again could be tedious to do manually. So first we wrote an algorithm to automate this task. So first module is automating the task of training data generation. Then second module we wrote was for training this neural network. So this neural network gets trained on these examples. And then we test this neural network on new data set. So this module is called object detection module. And this will give us output where it can identify the animals. And now our final task require us to link these outputs throughout the video to give us the trajectory of animal. This task is known as track linking or object tracking. So we wrote these 4 modules to automate all these tasks associated with object detection and tracking. And we call our framework as MOTH, multi-object tracking in heterogeneous environment. Once this framework was ready, we tested it on various videos. So here we took videos from 2 species. First was black bug video in 4 types of habitat. And then we took these wasps on their nest, which are brought into laboratory. So it represents semi-natural conditions. And these videos were contributed by Nitika from RG's lab. So we tested our framework on these 6 videos. Here I am showing you one example GIF from our Blackbug videos where it has been tracked using moth. And this is an example for wasp videos. So once this work was done, we wanted to make this approach usable to other users. And it becomes really difficult for novice users to customize and implement it on their dataset. Therefore, we developed a GUI tool on the top of our framework, and this tool can be called from Anaconda environment, and then it's just simple click and run functionality. A lot of part of this GUI tool was done by an intern in our lab, Anant.
Tava com KR2, continuo vai aqui. De repente, do nada, avistei lá de longe. E até isso
Hello, Mr. Rafal. Can you please mute yourself? Hello.
Vishnu, you can mute it.
Yeah, I've just done it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this repository and this GUI tool is available via GitHub on this link, and we have submitted manuscript for this chapter. So now moving on to second chapter. In second chapter, we compared various techniques on the videos which vary in heterogeneity in the background, and we tested these techniques on the videos to provide guidelines on which tool to use for what type of video. So as I mentioned, these 2 methods, image subtraction and color thresholding, and the third method which we developed based on CNN, what we see is that many tools or framework which are out there in the context of animal tracking use one of these methods in the step of identifying objects or animals. However, these tools may or may not work on a certain type of video. So if somebody wants to use these tools, they have to do this hit and trial approach, which is really inefficient because first, customizing these tools for our dataset is time consuming. And second, if it is based on neural network approach, we need a lot of training data and high quality videos. So, but if somebody understands what technique each tool uses and how that technique is supposed to work on a particular type of data set, task of selecting the tool for their work becomes easier. So with that motivation, we selected these 3 techniques and we implemented on various type of data sets with varying background complexity. And then we quantified the performance of each technique on these data sets, and we came up with the recommendations on which technique can be used for a particular type of video data set. So videos which we used for testing these techniques are first Blackbug videos, second these wasp videos which I already showed you, and third these videos from fish experiments in our lab, which shows, so this shows a gradient of heterogeneity. These fish videos are recorded in completely controlled environment, whereas Blackbug videos are in completely natural environment, and these wasp videos are somewhere in between. And these 2 videos, wasp and fish, were contributed by Nitika and Jitesh. Techniques which we use for this purpose were these techniques which I already mentioned: image subtraction, color thresholding, convolutional neural network on which our tool was based. And for the Blackbug videos, we use one more technique known as YOLO. YOLO is a specific type of network architecture, and our collaborator, Dr. Colin Torney, has developed an algorithm based on YOLO. So next, after implementing these techniques on all these data sets, we quantified the performance. So how we do that? For each image, we will get an output from the our algorithm, which is represented by these green rectangles here. As you can see, these red circles are marked the objects which are identified as black bug, but these are other objects in the background. So we call them false detection. And then you can see some black bug are missed, marked by these black circles. So this we called as failed detection. So there are two types of error here, failed detection and false detection. And our aim is to minimize both types of errors. So I'll quickly show you the result on these three types of data set. So first row is failed detections and second row is false detections. Failed detections are animals which we missed. False detections are other things which we identified as animals. And then first column is fish, then wasp, then black bug. So one would expect that neural network should always work better than all other techniques. But surprisingly, that was not the case here. For example, if you see for fish videos in terms of false detection, we see that image subtraction works even better. And for WASP videos, you can see that thresholding performs as good as neural network approach. So then we quantified all the video properties and then we came up with guidelines such as how to select a technique based on video properties, contrast between animal background, movement of animals, and group cohesiveness. And we provide list of tools, what techniques they work on, and how they are supposed to work for each video. And then, as I mentioned earlier, for our black bug videos, we also tested this Euro-based implementation on our videos. And in terms of false detection, it works even better than CNN. So we ended up using this implementation for our videos. And here you can see another example of tracked video using this YOLO technique. As you can see here that all the individuals are identified and they have one attached ID with them. But this ID keeps changing whenever there is some abrupt movement. So, but we need to keep individual IDs throughout the video. So for our purpose, we still had to do a lot of manual work, which was to visually watch these videos and keep noting down wherever the ID is flipping. And then I manually correct these trajectories. So for the next part of my thesis, I corrected trajectories for 10 videos and we used these videos for the analysis. So moving on to second part where we studied collective behavior of black bug in their natural habitat. So, and we studied this collective escape dynamics in the context of predation. Now, witnessing predation events in nature is really difficult and rare. So, to simulate a predation or mild threat-like scenario, we used this approach where we kept recording black bug's natural behavior, and somewhere in the middle of video, one of the observer walks towards this herd, and it acts as a mild threat or perturbation for this group. And individuals identify that someone is moving towards them, and they gradually start moving. So once these animals are moving, we stop our approach, but we keep recording the video. So we are able to get how they are responding to this threat. I'm showing you one example here. So this is how in this particular herd responded to our approach. And this is another example. And as you can see here that these two kind of response are very different in terms of not only speed but also the patterns which they are forming. So how do we try to understand this response? So first we quantify this response and we try to understand this dynamics at group level, and then we move on to individual level. So specific questions which I asked here are, how do these group patterns change during search perturbation? And what is the escape dynamics? And then we identify whether different individuals react differently to this approach and how that overall shapes the group's response. So let's move on to first question, which is where we quantify group level patterns and see how it changes during the perturbation. So as you had seen these two graphs in our literature review, we see that animals respond and form these different types of patterns is in response to any threat or predator attack. And they also change their social interactions. And these social interactions can be measured by looking at their alignment and attraction forces. And there are some metrics which have been proven useful to quantify such forces. So we will be using these metrics to quantify group level patterns. First metric is nearest neighbor distance between individuals. This is used to measure group cohesion. So it tells us about the local attraction tendencies among animals. The second metric which we use is polarization. It measures groups' directionality and it will tell us about local alignment tendencies. And third metric which we use to measure the strength of response is average speed of individuals. So here I am showing you a short clip of their response. It has been sped up 8 times. And I'll plot the time series for all three metric. So this is nearest neighbor distance and calculated for all frames for the full video. Similarly, this is median speed of individuals. And this is group polarization. We are taking median here just to take care of asymmetric distributions. So now I want you to pay attention for these two parts of these time series. So in group polarization as well as in median speed, we see these two patches where suddenly median speed is high. And for polarization, we see that for some time groups remain polarized. So we identify these patterns from these time series and call them as events. And we do this for all the videos. So here I'm showing you all three metric together for smoothened out time series. So what we see here for these two events is that speed is high and polarization is high. However, if you look at this NND, this pattern looks different for these two events. For first event, NND is increasing, which means group becoming sparse. In second one, you see NND decreasing, which means group becoming cohesive. So therefore, we go back to the videos and look at these timestamps to identify these events, and we segregate them by calling first as escape event and second as coordinated bout. So let me show you an example. So these pre and post phases are when groups are stationary and doing their natural activity. This is before all the events and this is after all the events. Now these two events, first escape event, you see that some individuals start moving and responding to this threat and gradually other individuals pick up. And that's why maybe we see this increase in NND. Second thing you see is when all the individuals have started moving and they are moving in a coordinated fashion. So that's why we call it as escape event and this is coordinated movement bout. So what we saw here is that these three metrics can be used to characterize various movement states in these videos, and we can identify particular events also by looking at these time series. So once we have identified these events and quantified the patterns, now we look at what exactly is the escape dynamics of these groups. How do these groups respond to the threat? More specifically, to get an intuition, it's like whether the individuals come together first and then run away, or they started running away and then join each other and form a cohesive group. And we can understand that by looking at the interplay of these three metrics. So as we had seen earlier, we have time series for all three metrics. So to look at the relationship between these three metrics, we use a technique called cross-correlation function. So what cross-correlation tells us is that for two time series or two vectors, how similar these are with each other and with respect to time lag. What I mean by that is, if you look at these two time series here, if you keep shifting this red time series with respect to blue, at some point it matches completely with the blue time series. So that at that lag, their correlation will be maximum. So we do this for any two vectors. At various lag, we calculate the similarity between them and we get an output like this. So we did this for our vectors. And first, let me explain how we interpret this output. So what you see at y-axis is the correlation strength, which tells us how similar those two time series are. And the x-axis tells us about that at what lag that correlation is maximum. So if we see that maximum correlation, if the cross correlation between them is positive, that would mean that either both of that increase or decrease. And a positive lag in x-axis will tell us that A follows B or B precedes A. So let me show you this example output for all three metric. So first is polarization and speed. So here what we see is that maximum cross correlation is positive and lag is 0. So what that would mean in terms of group's behavior is that group orientation and speeding are happening simultaneously. If we look at NND and polarization, we see a negative cross correlation and a positive lag. So what that would mean is group orientation happens before group cohesiveness. We see a similar pattern for NND and speed, which is positive lag and negative correlation. So again, this would mean that group speeding happens before group cohesiveness. And this is how we interpret the behavior, group level behavior from these output. So again, for this particular video of these four phases, we plotted this metric for all the events. So let's first focus on polarization and speed of individuals. Here what we see that for all four phases, we see positive correlation and zero lag. However, when we look at NND and polarization, what we see is that correlation becomes negative for escape and coordinated bout, and then lag is positive here. And similarly for NND and speed of individuals again, for these two particular phases, cross correlation becomes negative and there is a positive lag. So what it tells us for this particular video is that during these response events, these interaction rules are changing in quality as well as quantitatively as well as qualitatively. But what I mean by that is the sign of cross correlation is changing here, and also the strength of correlation is changing. So now we are interested to see whether it's a pattern for all the videos or only just one-time observation. So we repeated this process for all the videos, and here I will show you the results. So first let's have a look at correlation strength, which is y-axis of this cross correlation graph. So what we see here is that for polarization and median speed of individuals, for all four phases, there is a positive cross correlation. And if we look at lag, which is x-axis of this graph, we see that we see zero lag for all four phases. What that means is that polarization is positively correlated with speed here, but there is no causal or directional relationship. So polarization and increase in speed are happening simultaneously. Then we have a look at nearest neighbor distance and polarization. And if we look at correlation strength, then we see that for these two events, it becomes negative. This is the pattern we saw for that particular video. And then again, if we have a look at lag, what we see that only for coordinated bout, there is a positive lag. What that means is that polarization is not negatively correlated with NND here during the escape and coordinated bouts. So what it would imply is that increased polarization means higher cohesion, and polarization precedes and group cohesion in the coordinated bouts. Then we have a look at third relationship, which is NND and median speed. Again, we see negative cross correlation for these two events and a positive lag only for coordinated bout. So this would again mean that increased speed implies higher cohesion, and cohesion precedes speed precedes cohesion during these coordinated bouts. So by looking at the interplay of these metric, what we understood about group response is that group speeding and group orientation happen simultaneously. And when performing coordinated movement, these groups first speed up and orient, and both of these things happen simultaneously. And then as a result of this, the groups become cohesive. So you can think, intuitively, you can think of it as individuals speeding up and running away from threat, and gradually they are coming together. So once we have described the group level response, now you are interested to know what is individual level or local level response. And what we see in animal societies is that there are different levels of organization. We see egalitarian societies at one end of the spectrum and despotism at the other end. And also, in many societies, this type of organization could depend on context. So, for example, in this study of pigeon flocks, these are homing pigeons. Now, what authors did is they calculated the cross correlation in their velocities during the task of homing, and then they constructed this network of their lead lag relationships. And what they found was that for the task of homing, they saw a hierarchical structure in this pigeon flock. And in many self-organizing systems or fusion societies, many times we can find these individuals who have a certain amount of influence on other individuals. So since our blackbug herds, they are a fusion society, we didn't expect any stable hierarchical structure, but we thought that for a particular context such as predation, maybe such relationships emerge. So to test that, we looked at these leader-follower relationships. So before moving further, I'll define a few terms here, which we'll be using for this analysis. So by information transfer, what we mean here is change in the speed of individuals. Since we are looking at collective movement, and this movement could be a result of their individuals' vigilance activity or perceiving information from other individuals, but ultimately it results in their movement. So by information transfer, we mean here change in speed. Then we try to identify these initiators and laggers. And again, what we mean by that is initiators are individuals who first identify the threat, or in other words, individuals who start to move first. So again, we'll look at change in speed to identify these individuals. And once the individuals are moving, they can then transfer information to other individuals and they influence other individuals' movement. So these individuals we call as influencers or leading individuals or leaders. And some individuals who don't, whose movement is not correlated with any other individuals, we call them as isolated individuals. So let's first have a look at how do we identify response initiators. So as I mentioned earlier, we look at the change in speed. So first we calculate speed of all the individuals throughout the video. And then by after smoothing this time series for each individual, we identify these jump points, the points where their speed change. And this we do using change point analysis. And we note down this timestamp. And by doing so, we can construct this sequence. For example, this individual responded first, then second, then third, like that. And then we note down top 5 responses for each video. So for this particular video, the approach was from here, and what we found was that this individual was first to respond, this second, this third, and like that we get all the responses. So what we saw here was that individuals vary in their response. Next, now we move on to identifying whether leader-follower type of dynamics emerge during this response, or do some individuals pose some influence on other individuals? And again, how we do it is we look at change in speed and we calculate cross correlations in their velocities. So as you saw earlier, by looking at cross correlation, we can identify lead and lag between two vectors. So we do same thing for all the individuals. So I'm showing you one example group where there are 3 members and we calculate cross correlation in their speed, and then we plot the lag between them here. So here what you say is the A is following C by a lag 3, C is following B with a lag 1. So the structure, the hierarchy will look like this. For the same group, there could be another scenario where A is following both C and B with different lag. And for this particular group, this hierarchical structure will look like this. So for our animal groups, we calculate this lead lag dynamics for the escape bout, and we look at their lead lag relationships. And for different videos or different phases, we might find different scenarios. So here I'll show you 3 examples. One extreme could be where all the individuals are uncorrelated, which would mean that they are moving independently. Other example could be where all of them are connected, which means that there is some hierarchy of this influence. And then we can see a middle state where some individuals are connected and some are isolated. Now we are interested in knowing whether these relationships already exist in our groups or whether they emerge during these escape responses. So for that purpose, what we do is we construct these graphs for all 4 phases. So this is output for one particular video, the video which I showed to you. And what we see here is that for pre and post phases, which are their natural state, we don't see any strong correlations in their velocities. However, for escape and coordinated bout, we see these relationships emerging. Now we want to see whether this pattern holds true for all the videos. So this is just the visual representation. You can see these 4 phases here, and these are the 10 videos which we analyzed. And visually you can see these relationships emerging during these escape or coordinated phases, even if there was no correlation earlier. So we quantified this by first plotting number of or proportion of connected individuals in the graph. And what we see here is that for these 2 phases, escape and coordinated bout, these proportion of connected individuals increases. And similarly, if we look at number of solitary individuals, then it decreases during these 2 phases. So what we saw here was that transient leader-follower relationships emerge during the response bout. Now, as we have seen these leader-follower pairs here, we want to identify among all these pairs which are the individuals who are posing maximum influence on all other individuals. And then we call them influential individuals or leaders. And how we do that is, essentially what we want to see is that which individuals spread the information fastest to other group members and to maximum number of group members. And for very complicated, for such big networks, it becomes difficult to do it visually. So we use a network metric which tells us about the nodes which are best placed to influence entire network most quickly. And that is what we need in our influential individuals. So we calculate this closeness centrality metric. What this metric does is it looks at the number of nodes to which focal node is connected and what is the shortest path to all other nodes. So for this particular network, if we calculate closeness centrality and then rank the individuals by this metric, for example, here we can see that this 346 individual ID 346 had maximum influence over other individuals. So we do that, and again we identify top 5 ranking individuals. So for this particular video, you can see that These two are both rank 1 individuals. This is rank 2 and then these rank 3. So we do this for all the videos, and again what we see here is that there are some individuals who pose influence over other individuals. And we also then we looked at whether these individuals who identified the threat first were same as the influential individuals, and what we found was that it doesn't appear to be the case for these black bug groups. So response initiators are not necessarily the influential individuals here. We also looked at the associations between these individuals. So what we mean by association here is physical proximity. So we identified nearest neighbor pairs, and when we saw whether that physical relationship is maintained before and after the end of towards the end of the video. And so we constructed a null model, and then we see that these common pairs which we found were were not more than the expectation. So associations are not maintained in these groups. So what we saw here was that these metrics such as NND, median speed, and group polarization, they can be used to describe group level behavior and identify certain movement phases. And again, relationship between these metrics tells us that these groups, they first speed up and orient and then become cohesive during the escape responses. And leader-follower relationship does emerge in these groups, but it's only for the duration of these escape events. And individuals vary in their response. Some individuals respond early to these threats, and some individuals pose more influence on other individuals. However, they need not to be the same. And associations between group members are not maintained in these groups. So once we have understood the group level response and how individuals particularly respond to these threats, we were interested in knowing how the heterogeneity, which could be, because we are looking at these animals in their natural habitat, there is various type of heterogeneity. One is group composition. There are different age, sex individuals in these groups. And then again, it's these individuals are not like particles in a homogeneous, in a well mixed system, but they also have a spatial structure. So how that spatial dynamics can affect the patterns which we just saw. So we look at two particular factors. One is age, sex of the individuals, and other is their spatial positions. And the specific questions which we ask here are: first, in absence of any perturbation, do these groups have a particular structure? By that I mean that does a specific age, sex individual occupies a specific position in the group? And then during the response, can we identify that the initiators which we saw, which individuals are these initiators, and similarly which individuals are the leaders or influential individuals. So first I'll tell you how we categorize these 4 age sex categories. So because these are high resolution videos, you can see here that if we zoom in, we can see the color, texture, and individuals' horns. So by using these information, we identify these 4 categories. So these dark color individuals are breeding males. Individuals, light color individuals with no horns are adult females. And then other males are non-breeding males as well as sub-adult males. And then the individuals with small body size and they don't have any horns, we put them in juvenile category. So they could be either female or male juvenile. And this is just to show you what is the distribution of these individuals pooled over all 10 videos. In terms of spatial position, we described these 3 spatial positions: front, back, and mid. So for each video, visually I divide it in 3 parts: front, back, and mid. And then for each individual, we see in which category does it lie. So the baseline distribution is this, that for all our videos, there are many more individuals in the middle part. So now let's move on to first question, where we want to have a look at spatial organization of the individuals. So what we did is, from each video, we selected 8 individuals and we got 20 individuals for each category. And then we go on to these videos and map their position. And what we found, this is the pattern which we found. So for this chapter, we are still doing that formal statistical analysis. So today, I'll be showing you inferences only by looking at the large effects or large differences which we see in these histograms. So here what we observe is that for these breeding males, they are either in the back or in the front. Very few of them are occupying middle positions. And then what we did next is, we followed the position of each individual throughout the video, and we saw what position that individual was occupying at the beginning of video and at the end of video. And then we plotted this consistency in the position. And here again, what we see, the clearest pattern is for breeding male, that they keep occupying same position. So by looking at these distribution, what we understood was that breeding males, they occupy the positions on periphery or front or back of the group, and then they retain these positions even during the response. So next we wanted to have a look at which individuals are more likely to initiate the response or identify the threat first. So as you remember, we had identified these initiators and we plot their position, we identify them in these videos. From here, we can have a look which age sex category to belong to, and we can map their position. So using that information, we plotted this information for top 5 initiators and top 5 laggers, which is last to respond for all the videos. This is the baseline distribution which I showed you for all the videos, and we use this to normalize our graphs. So the information which I present here would mean that out of all the females, how many were initiators, how many breeding males were initiators. So what we see here is that females are initiators and breeding males are last to respond. And then we do the same thing for their position, far, near, and mid. And again, these graphs are normalized according to the actual distribution. And what we see here is, it is quite intuitive, that near individuals are more likely to respond in early, and the individuals at the back of the group are more likely to respond late. So what we found about response initiation is that individuals nearest to the approach are likely to initiate the response, and furthest away are last to respond. Females are more likely to be the movement initiators, and breeding males likely to respond last. Then we have a look at which individuals are more likely to be these leaders or influential individuals. So for this again, we had identified these influential individuals. We map them on these videos and identify their age, sex category and position. So again, we plot top 5 individuals from all the videos. And what we see here is that breeding males are more likely to play the role of influential individuals. Whereas these other males, non-breeding plus sub-adults, they are more likely to do isolated movement, which means their movement is not correlated with other group members. If we have a look at the position, we see a weak pattern here, that more individuals at front and back. And what we had seen is that breeding males are influential individuals, and for the actual distribution of individuals, there are more breeding males at front and back. So this could just be related to this pattern, that because breeding males are influential individuals, we might be seeing this pattern. So what we saw is that influence over other group members, and spatial position of individuals doesn't affect their influence on the group. And then now this spatial position is with respect to the whole group. But what is the actual mechanism of leading and following? So for each leader-follower group, a leader could be leading the movement of other individual either from ahead or behind. And what we hypothesized is that because these breeding males join these groups for the purpose of mating, they might be displaying a push kind of behavior, or in other words, they might be leading from behind. Whereas these adult females might be showing a pull kind of behavior or leading from ahead. So I'll just show you result here. We can see the graphs later if we have time. So there was no clear cut pattern or very weak pattern for this. So for now we think we can't say that breeding males show push behavior and adult females show pull behavior. So individuals can influence the movement of other individuals either from ahead or behind. So what we saw here is that breeding males are influential individuals and spatial position of individuals doesn't affect their influence. So our results for this chapter are that individuals who are nearest to the threat are likely to respond first to these perturbations, and females are more likely to be the movement initiators, whereas breeding males are more likely to be influential individuals. We saw that spatial location of individuals doesn't affect their influence on the group, and the individuals can be leading from ahead or behind, which means there is no spatial restriction on information flow. So at the beginning, we set out to understand the collective behavior of these fission-fusion groups in the wild, and then we looked at how heterogeneity due to group composition affects this behavior. Now we go back to the what we know about collective behavior literature and Blackberg natural history. We try to put these results in the context. So one interesting result which we saw was that associations between individuals are short term, and leader follower relationships also emerge for a very short time span. This might be a consequence of these groups being fission-fusion groups, because for every group, individuals are less likely to see other members on the second day or third day. So that might be a reason why we don't see long-term associations between these individuals. Another interesting pattern we saw was in influence rank and role of position. What we saw was that position doesn't affect the influence on these group members. And that could be because for such groups in open habitat, they can perceive the movement of other individuals either from ahead, behind, or side. So there is no restriction on this perceiving the movement. We saw an interesting structure in terms of group organization, which was that breeding males were at the periphery of these groups. It could be because what we know from Blackberg natural history is that these breeding males, they occupy their own territories, and when some group is nearby, they join these groups to take up to make an opportunity for mating. So that might be the reason why we see these males at these peripheral positions. And we see mixed organization for other individuals as we observe all type of group composition for these animals. We saw that role of initiators and influential individual is played by particular individuals. So females are initiators and breeding males are influential individuals. So it would be interesting to see whether females are more vigilant in these groups, and because we saw that breeding males are influential individuals here, it would be interesting to see whether they show dominance towards other individuals in such groups. So this study throws light on how fission-fusion societies in the wild operate and function, and we see a set of collective decision rules in these groups. And it provides us a framework to go next and ask what sort of ecological conditions favor the evolution of such rules. And we can understand this by comparing and studying collective dynamics of other types of animal societies in the wild. So I would like to end with that and take your questions.
Let us thank Akanksha for a very nice presentation. You can unmute yourself and clap. So, now we can ask questions. Roshni said very nice presentation.
This is Renee. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Akanksha, very nice. I just had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Firstly, how in the system is a group defined? How do you define a group?
So in this Blackberg system, you can see for like geography, you can define it physically. So we see these individuals together in a very close proximity, maybe like less than 4 or 5 body lengths. And even if you look out in the field, so basically it's done visually. But in the field, if you observe group for some time, you can identify that like 2 clusters are far away from each other and they are staying like that for at least a duration of half an hour to 1 hour something. So when we go out to the field, we first find out these groups and we observe them simply for 15-20 minutes. And then when we know that these set of individuals are staying together, we call them a group and then we record their behavior.
Okay. I think my second question, the last one is, in one of your early videos, you had shown Blackberg moving in lines, distinct lines, and in another one, they were more diffused in their movement. So could habitat features affect whether they are moving linearly or less linearly? Is that something that one would need to think about, or that doesn't make any difference?
Yeah, so in our group, it doesn't appear like habitat because all these videos which I analyzed are from similar habitat type. And also, there are some theoretical study, like as I showed in my literature. There we see that this, because the first pattern which you saw was group splitting in various subgroups. So this fission probability in these groups may depend on like 2 things. One is heterogeneity in speed for these animals. So I think it will depend on group composition. And second thing is if some individuals try to pose influence or they prefer to, like if their internal preference is more than their preference to stay in the group, then we might see these type of fission events happening. So
No. So my question was more about linear movement as opposed to diffuse. If the habitat was affecting a linear movement, let's say there is a group of small shrubs or trees or something. So that was really my question.
yes,
So
yes. Yeah, for linear or other, we see other patterns also like band-like pattern. For that, I think habitat will also contribute. So that's why we had recorded videos in various types of habitat. So for these chapters, I have analyzed these grassland videos, but we also have videos from shrubby area and this salty, marshy area, and that is like these patterns will, I think, depend on this habitat structure also. So to see whether what type of these patterns they are forming, next step could be to analyze next set of videos from these other types of habitat. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Renee. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself and.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, sure.
This is Rohini.
Yeah.
Very, very nice, Akanksha.
Thank you.
I just want to, and very, very clear presentation. Very nice. Great job.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you something. I don't know if I'm asking an extremely stupid question, but so I get when you're looking at these leader-follower relations, I get then that when you get a lack of correlation, you infer, of course, that there is no such relation. But when you do see correlations, is there some probability of some of these correlations happening by chance? You know, two animals are actually appear like they are in leader-follower relationships, whereas in actual fact they're not. And is that a possibility? And how might one even construct a null, if if I may call it that. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. So we can't clearly call it a causal link. That's why, because we are just seeing a correlation in their speed. It could happen that it could, like, behaviorally they might not be posing an influence the way we understand this exact leader follower thing. But if we look at their movement pattern, then we are seeing this lead lag sort of relationship.
Yes.
So, like, I right now I can't comment how we can construct a null, but you are right that there is a possibility that it might not be like actual behavioral that leader follower.
Some of it certainly, but there may be a background. I was just wondering whether one could take the initial positions of these groups and make them go in random directions, and then figure out how many times you actually see such leader-follower relationships, and that might give you some kind of a null.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
I think that
Something just occurred to me.
direction wouldn't matter there, but if I just assign random speed for each individuals, like
Yeah, you know the details better, but I can only
yeah.
tell you sort of conceptually, would that allow one to construct such an hour?
Yeah, I'll think more about it. I think it can be.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Ravini. I think we should figure out something about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe something like a bootstrap equivalent might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Because we don't know, because if we assign velocities on our own, it could be anything and they will be obviously uncorrelated. We have to use something from the data to have some structure. Bootstrap might be one way. Yeah. But anyway, any other questions? You can unmute yourself and.
Danny here, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Vishu, can you hear me? Danny?
Go ahead. Yeah. If we can go ahead.
Hey, nice talk, Akanksha.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I have a question. Respond quickly. So let's say you have a system where
Can you
have
repeat
things
that?
that respond, but there are no influences.
Was not clear.
Would that mean that you'll have these black bugs running around, but they won't collectively move? Is that right? I understand that, right?
Yeah, Danny, can you repeat your question? I think they break off in the first point.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So let's say you have a system where there are some of those individuals which react to a predator. There are no influences. I mean, I'm just making a hypothetical scenario. So does that mean that the system won't collectively move?
I think in that case also it can move collectively if they respond in the same direction, because if there is no variation in the speed, but again if they move away from predation, and if there is variation in their speed, then maybe you will see many small subgroups in that kind of system.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay, then my question is this. So let's say, have you looked at different sets of individuals, like different groups, or is it the same thing for a long?
No, these are different groups. So
do you see different combinations of influences, and I don't remember the other word. I mean, the ones who respond and the influencers. Do you see different combinations, and do they have an effect on the overall collective phenomenon?
Different combination, by different combination, what do you mean?
Let's say 5 of them react quickly in one case, but in the other one reacts. But there are 7, let's say, influential individuals in one and 3 in the other. I mean, so different combinations of these.
You mean multiple individuals at rank 1 in first?
Exactly, something like that. And does that have any relation to the overall collective phenomena that you see?
Yeah, so in terms of initiators, we didn't see any case when there were multiple individuals reacting at exactly time scale. Because it will also depend on what resolution you are looking at, and since we are looking at like really fine resolution 30 fps, in these 10 videos I didn't see a case where there were multiple individuals. But in terms of influence, in some videos there are multiple rank 1 individuals or rank 2 individuals. but that number right now is very small to look at this relationship. But if we have more data, then definitely we can look whether it's related to. And I was thinking the same thing, that if there are more influential individuals, I can look at these group level patterns and it should be somehow related to that. Yeah, you're right.
Because I was wondering whether naturally when these organisms select groups or form these groups, will they have a critical number of, let's say, individuals that will respond quickly, individuals that are influential? I mean, I don't know about the biology here, but I
Yeah,
was wondering if
yeah,
critical
we
number
just need
exists.
more examples. So, because there are very few instances right now to comment on that relationship. But you're right that, I also think that there will be some connection.
Thanks, Akash.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Please unmute yourself and.
Hey Akanksha, I was just curious about for example, for breeding females, you said that they might be more vigilant. Could you think of any explanation why the non-breeding males remain isolated even in these escape events? I was just curious about it. Might be not be directly related to the work, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you
So we
think of
saw
any?
that these other males doing uncorrelated movement, right? You're asking about that. Um,
Yeah, the
and
non-breeding ones
yeah.
remain isolated.
Mhm. Yeah, so in these groups, what we observe in field also is that, as I mentioned, there are these all types of groups, like all male, all female, or mixed sex herds. And mostly what you see in these all male groups are these sub-adult males forming these all male sort of group. But they keep merging, like if they keep merging with these other groups, especially female groups. So if you look at sub-adults or non-breeding males, the only chance, because they can't participate in they don't hold a territory where a female might come for mating, and don't participate in so only way they could attend mating is by temporarily joining these groups. But they are not, I think they are not a proper part of these groups. So that may be one reason that when we see them responding, they don't they don't merge, or you can say do a coordinated movement with these other group members. That might be one reason.
Okay, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. Okay. So if there are no more questions, let us thank Akanksha again.
I'll quickly go our acknowledgements if
Oh,
there
okay.
is.
Fine, fine. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So, first of all, I would want to thank my advisor Vishnu for being the most amazing mentor that could ever be. And he always supported not only my PhD work, every aspect of my PhD work, but he always made sure to work towards other skills and also my career after PhD. I remember many times I was interested in activities or conferences which had no direct relation with my PhD, but he always supported and motivated me to go for such events and to apply for such activities. And I don't know how he manages to maintain this balance between providing complete freedom but also helping at every step whenever required. And he creates this environment in the lab where we can just forget about everything else and we can just focus on our work. And I think I can't list out the things I'm thankful for. There are so many things, and right now my mind has gone blank. But I'll just like to say a simple thank you to Vishu for everything. I would like to thank my advisor Kavita again for her constant guidance and mentorship throughout my PhD. And I remember that after every meeting with Kavita, I gained this new perspective towards my study system and new ideas. And also after every meeting, I felt so confident and there was a boost of energy and motivation whenever I talked with her. And even if she was busy, like every time I needed her help or needed to meet her, even if she was extremely busy, she made sure to make time and to give me an alternate time and have discussions and provide the help which was required. And many times I wonder that it's so difficult to get even one good advice. Like, how can somebody get two such amazing advisors? I don't know. Like, one has to be extremely lucky. So, thank you, Vishu and Kavita, for everything. Um, I would like to thank my thesis committee advisors, Professor Sandeep Krishna and Professor Anindya Sinarana, for the discussions which I had with them. Their feedback was always very constructive and supportive, and I always got this reassurance that I'm going in the right direction. I want to thank CES faculty members for the amazing courses which I attended and the discussions which had regarding my work or the questions which they posed regarding my work. It always helped me to proceed in right direction. I want to thank CES office for taking care of all the paperwork whenever it was required. And I went to a lot of conferences and many times I was short on time and only with their help it was possible to do all the paperwork on time. I want to thank ESS for conducting this talk and the past talks like comprehend thesis, progress talk. I want to thank Kavita's lab members which attended my practice talk and gave really nice feedback on my work and my presentation. I want to thank all these funding agencies for supporting my work and work-related travel. This work required a lot of tedious and manual work, and it wouldn't have been possible without these project students who joined our lab at different points, and they helped me in my project at various stages of my work. So, thank you, Anand, Shruti, Preeti, Shreyas, Abratman, Bhavuk, and Vedant. I want to thank my amazing lab members. Our lab is such a fun place that I realized only during this lockdown that how much I miss this place and how habituated I was of going to our lab, and every day felt like party, and it never felt like we are working or doing something. It always felt like we are having fun. So thank you all of you. My family at IISc, Jaideep, Nitin, Ramya, Ankur, Abhas, and Harshita. We had so much fun-filled life at campus, and we had named our group Tumba Santosha because we were always happy when we were together in the campus. There are many people who contributed to this PhD even before I joined this PhD program. First, my first mentor in this field of ecology, Karpagam, she had supported me and she had provided inspiration and affection since the time I first wrote to her. And till now, she keeps doing that. Thank you, Karpa, for everything. My Hornbill team at Pake. This was my first project in the field of ecology, and I not only we had so much fun, I learned so many things from these people, especially Rohit and Rushma. They were my first mentors, and they taught me many things about field biology, not by preaching, but by showing me in the field. And our family at Paboi, Neelam, the auntie and mom. Thank you, guys. Most importantly, I want to thank this person. I'm really grateful to have this person as my partner, and I want to thank him. Because of him, PhD went dancing and laughing like this. And I want to thank my parents and my brother. I don't think one can list out the things for which they are thankful to their parents, but to say the least, last couple of months, they took care of everything and I could just focus on my work and finish this PhD. And I want to thank you all for listening to me today.
Yeah, applause, everyone, please. Hi, Kavita, do you want to say anything? Do you want to say something, or can you unmute yourself?
Hey, no, not
Akanksha
after.
was
This
our
is beautiful. After
Akanksha was our
Akanksha's
first
beautiful
joint venture,
applause.
no?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just been great. Yeah, thanks to you, Akanksha. I thought, after studying Black Box for like, 25, 26 years, I can't learn something super new. But thanks to the question, the way you posed it, and the approaches you've taken, and how you've tackled what's, quite a difficult problem using these different field methods, computer vision techniques. Thanks to that, it's been so exciting getting these new insights into black buck behavior, and you've also set the stage for so much more kind of exciting lines of research one can do. And it's been great collaborating with you and Vishu. Thanks to you guys, I've been able to look at this, take a very different perspective towards addressing questions in animal behavior. Great job, Akanksha.
Thank you, Kavita. Thank you.
So, okay, thanks everyone for coming, and have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.